All right, let's dive into a really high-stakes intellectual showdown right from the heart of the Reformation. We're talking about a theological battle that pretty much set the course for Protestant thinking for centuries to come. We are heading to Geneva to unpack a fascinating argument over the very logic of God's plan for all of humanity.
And it all really boils down to this one simple question. When you're talking about God's eternal plan, does the sequence of events actually matter? Now, I know it might sound like a super technical detail, but as we're about to find out, some of the most brilliant minds of the 17th century believed the answer was a huge resounding yes, and that it changed absolutely everything.
So first things first, let's make sure we're all on the same page with the main idea here: predestination. In a nutshell, it's the belief that God, from the very beginning of time, has determined the final destiny of every single person, some for salvation and others not. This was a real cornerstone of Reformed theology.
But as you can imagine, this idea created a pretty profound logical puzzle. The big question that split these theologians was this: in God's mind, did his decision to save some people and pass over others come before or after he decided to allow humanity to fall into sin? And that's the puzzle that created two different schools of thought with some very long names, but the core difference is actually pretty simple.
Okay, so here we have two mouthfuls of words. On the left, you've got supralapsarianism, which literally means above the fall. This camp argues that God's decree to save or not save came before the fall was even a factor, back when humanity was just a concept, something creatable. But on the right, you have infralapsarianism, meaning below the fall. This view says no, the decree came after the fall. God is choosing from a group of people already seen as created and fallen. See the difference? It's all about the logical sequence in God's mind.
So let's take this abstract idea and plant it in a real place in time. 17th century Geneva. I mean, this was the intellectual capital of the Reformation. And after its most famous supralapsarian teacher died, the whole city found itself at a major theological crossroads.
Our story really has three main players, or maybe three generations of them. It kicks off with the death of Theodore Beza in 1605. He was this towering figure, the big champion of the supralapsarian view. Then, a little later, around 1618, his successors Diodati and Tronchin step into the spotlight. And finally, the man who would come in and settle the debate once and for all for Geneva, Francis Turretin.
So you can imagine, with Beza gone, the big question on everyone's mind was, what happens now? Would his successors, including his own son-in-law, carry that supralapsarian torch? Or was Geneva's theology about to take a different turn?
Now, Giovanni Diodati was no small-timer. The man was a brilliant scholar, an incredible speaker. His reputation was so huge that when he spoke at the famous Synod of Dort, the president of the whole synod said his speech sounded like it was divinely inspired. So yeah, when this guy talked, people paid attention.
And this is where the plot really thickens. Because when Diodati and Tronchin get to the Synod of Dort, they do something, well, fascinating. While they're busy fighting other theological battles, they quietly, subtly backed away from Beza's position. Just look at the language they used. They described humanity not as creatable, but as already fallen, guilty, and corrupt. This was a quiet but absolutely decisive public shift toward the infralapsarian side.
And that subtle shift totally set the stage for our main event, Francis Turretin. He's the one who would take that infralapsarian leaning and hammer it into the definitive orthodox position for Geneva. He laid out a clear, systematic argument that would define their theology for generations. Turretin basically came in and took the supralapsarian view apart, piece by piece. First, he argued that it kind of makes God's first move look like an act of hatred, which just doesn't square with his goodness. Second, he said it's a really harsh picture, suggesting God creates people just to condemn them. Third, he pointed out that it's just not logical for God to decree justice or mercy on people who aren't even thought of as existing yet, let alone being guilty. And finally, he said it gets the order all wrong. Creation and the fall have to come before election. They aren't just a means to get it done.
And here is his alternative, laid out beautifully. Let's just walk through Turretin's logic. Step 1. God decrees to create mankind. Okay. Step 2. He decrees to permit the fall. It's only then, at step 3, that from this now fallen race he decrees to elect some. That's followed by the plan to send Christ for them, and then, finally, to call them by his grace. You can just feel how the logic flows so cleanly from one step to the next, right?
So, why does any of this matter? Well, this is the crucial point. For Turretin, this wasn't just some abstract mental exercise. He was totally convinced that getting this logical order right had huge, practical implications for how a Christian actually lives their life day to day.
He was adamant that this deep doctrine wasn't some academic game to satisfy our curiosity. No way. Its real purpose was deeply personal and practical. It was meant to bring incredible comfort to the believer, to foster a genuine humility, and to encourage a holy, godly life.
And here's the beautiful connection he made. Turretin taught that a person's holy living isn't how you earn salvation. Not at all. Instead, it's the seal. It's the tangible evidence, the proof in your life that gives you the certainty that God's grace is really and truly at work in you. For him, good doctrine leads to a godly life, which in turn leads to a confident assurance. Which really leaves us with one final thought. Was this incredibly detailed debate just a product of its time, a historical relic? Or was Turretin right? Is taking the time to really understand the deep logic of what we believe still one of the most powerful tools we have for shaping how we actually live our lives today?